With Luka Doncic wrapping up another MVP caliber season and taking the Dallas Mavericks to an NBA Finals, begs the question, why the hell wasn't this man the first pick of the 2018 NBA draft? Was he a bad prospect? Funny thing is, he wasn't a bad prospect. The man was considered a basketball savant and the European version of LeBron James, if I'm being honest. And the funny thing is, LeBron James was playing against high school kids, while Luka was playing against grown men in the EuroLeague at the age of 16. The man had won a championship in the EuroLeague and was named EuroLeague MVP at the age of 18, making him the youngest player to ever win that award. And with all these accomplishments, he wasn't selected till the third pick, and even then was then traded down to Dallas. In my opinion, 3 teams that night committed 3 cardinal sins, and that's the reason Luka was not the first pick of the NBA draft. We're gonna go ahead and study each team case by case and see what sin they committed for them to not choose Luka and choose whoever else they got. First, we're gonna start off with the Suns. They had the first pick of the draft. They literally could have gotten whoever, including the European GOAT, Luka Doncic. They ended up selecting DeAndre Ayton, though. They said, nah, we're good. And that pick was so terrible on so many fronts. You could have made an argument it was a positional need, right? But you'd actually be wrong. Their biggest positional need was actually point guard, right? It was for them, it was like the best thing ever when Chris Paul ended up signing on with them because he was a point guard. He was what they needed. But can you imagine a backcourt of Luka and D-Book? Man, that backcourt would be one of the greatest backcourts to ever live if you let that backcourt actually play out. But why? Why would they draft Ayton over Luka? Well, we have a quote from Antonio Williams, who was part of the decision-making progress when it came to drafting Ayton over Luka. And what he said with DeAndre, one of the things was, you look at the things that he does. At his size, when you combine the athleticism and dexterity and agility, there are things he can just roll out of the bed and do. Well, Mr. Williams, that's cap. That's very cap. This man said it himself. He was not able to even sleep properly for the first few years because the man did not have a proper bed. So he, in fact, was not able to roll out the bed and do these things, okay? But in all seriousness, though, watching DeAndre Ayton's tape, the man was just taking advantage of his height versus like non-professional kids, because I still think people in college, most of them are kids, right? And he honestly feels like a man who just peaked in college. A lot of his offensive highlights were him getting near open looks underneath the basket where you're simply just not going to get those same looks in the NBA. I feel like scouts, what they do is they project what someone will become without considering if they already hit their peak, right? Maybe one of the people they looked at was Giannis. You know, Giannis was nowhere near as big as and bulky as Ayton was, right, when he was first drafted, but he ended up becoming that. So they're like, well, I mean, this guy's already better than Giannis was, I guess, like from a big man's perspective. Giannis wasn't even a big man coming into the league, but maybe they're like, yo, Ayton's already kind of built, he's already kind of strong, so imagine a few years in the league and he gets stronger faster. But what they failed to consider was the man might have already just been the best he could already. And from everything I see, Phoenix just kind of wanted to go with the safer option, which in my opinion is the cardinal sin they committed. If your team is bad enough to earn the first pick of the draft, you go for the fences. I mean, picking the safe pick is not gonna do anything if your team is already one of the worst teams in the NBA. And I understand that they had a bad history of drafting Euro players like Dragan Bender before, or Bender, whatever his name was. And I understand that, but at the end of the day, you keep drafting risky prospects, and a Luka Doncic will offset 5-10 years of bad prospects. Especially when we're talking about basketball, where all you need is one player to be an all-time great player, and it elevates your team by itself to become a playoff competitive team. Just one player is all you need. And I mean, how did it go? After they selected Ayton, how was he? I'm gonna be real, if I'm gonna be honest, when CP3 wasn't around, the man was a certified bust, okay? He's a certified bust now. And I get it, bust might be something crazy. A lot of people don't like to call him a bust because he is good on some level. He was a good team when, again, Chris Paul was there and was able to give him lob threats. But overall, though, if you need a player to be good, and without that player, you're just complete trash, you're a bust, especially if you're the first pick of the NBA draft. And that was a stacked NBA draft, stacked to the brim with great players. and they picked a bust over everybody, especially over Luka. It's crazy how they played it safe and yet drafted a bust because they ended up playing it safe. For that, I would say that is their cardinal sin. You get the first pick, you swing for the fences. I understand if there's a Victor Wembanyama or a Zion Williamson in the draft, but there clearly wasn't this year. This was one of those years where, kind of like this year, where there's not really a consensus number one pick. In my opinion, when that's the case, swing for the fences. You're the first pick because you're trash. You're not going to become great by playing it safe. Second pick was made by the Sacramento Kings, and they selected another bust in Marvin Bagley. Not really that surprising since the Kings are literally experts at selecting busts. And they selected Marvin Bagley because they didn't really need a point guard, right? They had De'Aaron Fox. So, I mean, that should kind of excuse them from not drafting Luka, right? Not really, though. Let me explain. With basketball, there are 5 starters. So getting one life-changing prospect, if you think that guy is better, can change your franchise. Even if it ain't the best fit, draft the best prospect and trade either the player you drafted a year later or the player you had before. Kings actually learned their lesson, and to their credit, they ended up drafting Tyrese Halliburton with the 12th pick 2 years later, and he was the best prospect available for that pick by far. Even though they already had a capable point guard in De'Aaron Fox, they still pulled the trigger on that. Tyrese ended up being great. They ended up trading him for an all-star caliber player in Domantas Sabonis, and that actually helped the Kings mount multiple playoff runs. That pick enabled them to have the most success that they've had in years. The cardinal sin that they committed was drafting based on need and not drafting the best available player. They learned their lesson. So it is good for them that they finally learned the lesson, but damn it, it cost y'all Luka in the process to learn that lesson. Third and final cardinal sin was committed by the Atlanta Hawks. The funny thing is they didn't just pass on Luka. They actually did draft him and then proceeded to trade him for Trae Young and a future first, which ended up being Cam Reddish. Now, what they wanted to do essentially was play the numbers game. If we can get Trae Young and then end up getting a first rounder, basically giving themselves more chances, right? And I get it, right? In my opinion, the NBA draft is a crapshoot. It's a lottery. And the more draft picks you have, the more chances of hitting the lottery that you have. And I understand that. But at some point, man, you basically traded a franchise-altering player to get extra chances to draft a franchise-altering player. You know what I'm saying? Now, the funny thing is, I don't really hate this tactic, okay? But I prefer for teams like the Miami Heat or the OKC Thunder or the Denver Nuggets. Teams who have proven to get the most out of their draft picks and be good at drafting. That Atlanta team just simply had a terrible history of drafting players, did not have a history of drafting well at all. So for them to think, well, we're just going to get more draft picks, what you end up doing is just having more chances for you to select even more busts. Now, the fact that they still ended up with an all-star caliber player in Trae Young, I would say they took the smallest L compared to picks number 1 and 2. It just stings a little more, though, because they're the ones that drafted him. And the man was literally there holding up their logo in the picture. And it also stings because the man never forgot that. And you dropped 70 on your head. That's disrespectful, bro. The lesson for this one is basically know your strengths and your weaknesses. If you're bad at drafting players, don't sacrifice a selection for more draft picks so you can just end up getting more busts. You get a top 3 pick, execute it. Get the pick. Don't think about it twice. Don't get more draft picks. Don't get fancy. If you're not good at that, don't get fancy. Now, it's not all doom and gloom. I mean, these 3 teams, the Kings, the Suns, and Hawks, have all mounted multiple playoff runs since that draft. So it's not all doom and gloom, right? But I'm pretty sure they would have all preferred to have Luka instead of the player they ended up with. Hopefully, teams in the future take this example and don't commit the same sins that they committed. And if we get another Luka in Europe, hopefully he doesn't get looked over. Hopefully they draft him at his right position. And obviously with all the great European players right now in the league, I think a lot of teams are more willing to look their way because of that. So I don't think these sins will be repeated as much in the future. Hope you enjoyed it. Have a wonderful day. Peace out.